Our next speaker, Ruth Hendry, is going to talk to us about food recalls, fishing rules, and forestry, and how to create an IA strategy for a very disparate group of audience needs. Ruth, feel free to share your screen now while I'll talk a little bit about your background. Ruth has a broad experience in content, UX, and customer-led design. A data nerd at heart, she uses analytics, research, and testing to drive decision-making, resulting in digital experiences that put the customer at the forefront. Ruth is a consultant, but used to be the head of strategic growth at Springload, which is a local digital consultancy. During her time at Springload, she worked on large-scale content and information projects for organizations including Massey University, Vodafone, Air New Zealand, and the Te Papa Museum. Ruth is joining us live from Wellington. Over to you.
Morena Timo, can you all see my slides? I'm going to take that as a yes. Excellent. Well, kia ora koutou, ko Ruth toku ingoa. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks, Kat, for that excellent opening talk as well. I really appreciate that. As Kelsey said, I'm a consultant in information architecture and content strategy here in Wellington. And today I'll be talking about how we created an IA strategy for the Ministry of Primary Industries' very, very diverse audience needs, from food recalls to fishing rules and forestry. First up though, some thanks. Sometimes people think of information architecture as an activity for a solo IA genius, but it is absolutely not that. IA is totally a team game, and there are lots of people who worked on this mahi, most notably MPI's customers, whose insights helped us work out how to best organize and label the information we wanted to present. We also had an amazing team at MPI who really wrangled stakeholders magnificently and championed this work internally. We had Lana Gibson, some of you will know her as Lanalytics, who provided analytics insights. And we also had previous vendors who advocated for IA change, alongside my previous Springload colleagues with whom I worked on this. Without all of these people, the project wouldn't have succeeded. So I really wanted to acknowledge them. Before we get into the details, because I know we all love details and we all love definitions here, let's clarify what I mean by an IA strategy. If IA is the way information is organized, structured, and labeled, then an IA strategy is the plan for how you achieve an effective, sustainable, and people-focused IA. And I love that already we've had two slightly definitions of what an information architecture is. So I think we've certainly got something to talk about at the panel discussion later. So today I'll be talking briefly about what we did as part of our IA strategy for MPI, and the 8 things we learned that I'll take into other projects. But if you're anything like me at the start of this project, you might not realize what the Ministry for Primary Industries actually does. So for some of you in Aotearoa, you might have a better idea, but have a quick think. Hold a picture in your mind of what something called the Ministry of Primary Industries could possibly do. Okay, got some ideas? Here are just some of the things that MPI do. They publish food recalls. So most recently, you might have seen some of the news around baby formula. They look after Aotearoa's biosecurity. So when you're flying into New Zealand, they'll be the people with the sniffer dogs who are looking out for bananas, apples, and other pernicious fruits. They manage the carbon credit system. So that's one of the ways in which Aotearoa tries to meet its climate change emissions targets. They tell you how many snapper you can legally catch, which actually came in surprisingly useful for me a couple of weekends ago when I took my kids fishing in Matthew Soames. If you want to, they tell you how to export honey. They give you advice on food safety at home, like, for example, just what temperature does that chicken have to be on your barbecue? Not that any of us are barbecuing today. They fund and support rural businesses. They manage farm animal welfare. They give guidance on running your sheep cheese business. And most importantly, for a lot of expats in New Zealand, they help you move your beloved pet across countries, which is a surprisingly high user need. So this means that with all this diverse type of information, the people who need MPI's content have got very, very diverse user needs. This also means, unsurprisingly, that MPI's website had a huge amount of content on it. As one of their customers said, it's hard to find what you need and it's hard to understand. As the website grew over time, as MPI's remit and ministry capability increased, it became increasingly difficult for users to find the information they needed, which is a pretty common occurrence on large information websites. Customers couldn't find what they needed, so often they would give up and call the contact center instead, which really added to customers' frustration. And MPI was an organization already suffering some reputational challenges, sometimes unfairly. So frustrated customers was something they really couldn't afford. Now, before we get into what we did though, let's chat about whether it worked and why you should care about the rest of this talk. An IA strategy done well can have a huge impact. In this case, we reviewed the analytics from the website and the contact center after the new IA had gone live. And we found that MPI's customers showed a 37% decrease in time spent on the homepage and landing pages. This means that what they're doing is using the IA and navigation elements to find where they need to go faster. So less time faffing about, more time doing what they need to, and the more likelihood that they're going to comply with the rules as well. There was a 21% decrease in on-page searches, so people could find the content they need more easily, which means they're landing on the right page the first time. And also, there was a 53% reduction in callers to MPI, saying they couldn't find what they need on the website. This means that people can more easily get the information they need online, and that contact center staff are spending their valuable time helping people with more complex user needs instead, which is of benefit to both customers and the staff because they feel like they're providing a more valuable service. It's quite hard to squeeze 14 weeks of intense work into 20 minutes. So what I'll do is give you a very quick overview of what we did and then dive into some of the things we found. So we started by understanding the business through focus groups, stakeholder interviews, reviewing many strategy and research documents, taking a look at the websites from similar organizations, and also reviewing the MPI website as well. When we do that for any large organization, what we're looking for is things like, what did MPI want to achieve? What's their current state? What's their digital maturity like? What are their content processes and governance like? What is the state of the current IA, and really, how did it get to be that way? And also, what are MPI's hopes and aspirations for their digital channels? Then obviously we want to understand the customers through customer research and reviewing the website analytics and user needs. In this case, we really had the luxury of time and focus to get insights from over 300 people across various types of qual and quant research, including 30 in-person participants. And in this case, we're looking for things like, what do people want to achieve? What are their mental models for how they group, organize, and label information? What are their main challenges? And really, do they even know what MPI does and where to find the information? And then we create the strategy, and it is that simple, kind of. Of course, it's never, ever quite that simple. The thing I love about projects like this is that they really teach you new things. And then they remind you of the things you know, but that you don't always think about. So I've picked out 8 things we learn that I'll really hold on to and take into other IA strategy projects. And I did also actually learn an in-depth knowledge of phishing rules, which has come in surprisingly useful over the past few months. I mentioned earlier that we started by understanding the business first. And for me, that's vital. I know everyone here cares about customers, and of course they're crucial, but my preference for an IA strategy is usually to start with the business and work out what motivates them so I can tailor the customer research to address the business concerns as well. Often looking at a business's current IA is really a window into their soul. It tells you what they value, what's important to them, and also the stories they want to tell their customers. Freud would have a wonderful time psychoanalyzing businesses through their IAs. MPI actually had, unusually, 2 IAs on their website. You can kind of see in the top one that they're really inching towards a customer focus. That's the task-based IA. But they also clearly, in the bottom IA, want to tell their story as a mega ministry. So they've got separate branding for each business unit in that lower IA. Understanding the business need to promote each business unit, each separate part of their mega ministry, was key to understanding stakeholders' concerns, and it made sure that we could address this within our customer research. It also meant that benchmarking the current IA was crucial. Through this, we could pinpoint exactly what about the current IA wasn't working to support the case for change. But of course, we do care about customers as well, and we know we wouldn't succeed without understanding them. When an organization has a lot of potential audience types with a lot of different customer needs, the number of potential people to speak to can seem overwhelming. So in this case, I really love creating a customer matrix. It helps you find that sweet spot of efficient and in-depth research, helping you work out what audience types to speak to assess the biggest range of user needs within the fewest number of participants. I don't know if any of you ever did logic problems as a child. I was a very nerdy child, but a customer matrix is essentially one big logic problem. So what we did was we used analytics and call center data along with previous research to identify the most common user needs. Within these customer needs, we prioritized needs from novice and non-expert user groups, as they're usually the people who need most help from someone like MPI. And then we made sure we identified needs across all the business units, all the customer journeys that we knew were challenging, and also content that was missing from the website. So you can see those needs down the left-hand side in this example. Once we'd identified them, then we could see which audience groups met most of those needs. And this would tell us which one would get us the greatest coverage of needs in the most efficient way. So in this example here, you can see that food producers and farmers cover the most needs. They also cover needs of the public as well as their business. So they were really helpful people for us to target as part of our research. Once we understood what audience groups we would prioritize, then we could plan our research activities. So card sorts are absolutely the best way to understand people's mental models around information. That's how people perceive that content should be organized in groups and how it should be labeled. So when you have a lot of audience types and a lot of content, I totally recommend card sort and then card sort again. So a card sort will really complement some of the other types of research you might do, for example, top tasks and tree check testing the IA. In this case, card sorts gave us insights that were crucial to inform the IA, and we wouldn't have got these insights in any other ways. One of the insights we got was that people clearly separated business and personal information. So to give you an example of what this might be, personal information might be something like, I'm selling jam at a school fair. Are there any rules I need to follow? I would never sell jam at a school fair. I'm a terrible cook, but that is a thing that people do. Business information might be something like, I run a business selling jam and other preserves, and I want to break into other markets. What do I need to do to export jam? This separation was true of every type of content from fishing to food safety. Like I was saying about fishing in Matthew Soames when I took my kids there, the information I need or the query I have, in theory, is the same as kind of a fisheries business. It's how many fish can I catch? But the personal context clearly marks it out as different, and I perceive that task to be different. A thing to note on this is that in my experience, we don't always see people separating personal and business content, especially for other government services, for example, like tax or employment. So this was a really significant finding that informed our IA. The card sorts also showed that people considered these really beautiful, useful hierarchies within each category, like a logical process order or maybe broader to more detailed information, which again informed the IA. There's also something really lovely about the tactility of images from an in-person card sort that you just don't get from an online card sort. And this was particularly persuasive for stakeholders. It kind of allowed them to better consider the needs of the people behind the images. Okay, I'm totally preaching to the converted here. All of us know the value of designers, and we all know the value of prototypes in conveying information. So I'm going to mea culpa. Frankly, I messed up when it came to estimating this project for the agency I worked for. I had assumed that MPI simply needed a traditional IA, not an IA strategy. That means I had assumed that MPI just needed the menu labels, and that's what they thought as well. But input from a designer would have been incredibly valuable throughout the whole project. Here's an example of the finished website. So I've highlighted quite a few of the UI elements here, and every UI element and component I've highlighted here is related to IA. This means that UI decisions can impact on how successful an IA is. Obviously, we all know that. Involving a designer in the IA process would massively have enabled us to get their expertise and input on the UI decisions and recommendations and overall user journeys, and I think would have strengthened the strategy we provided. We also made some lo-fi prototypes, both to test some of the IA concepts and to communicate some of our IA decisions to senior stakeholders, like the recommendation to separate business and personal content. The lo-fi prototypes worked fine for customer testing. They got the concepts across, but the prototypes we used to share our rationale with stakeholders would have been much more powerful communication tool with the addition of that kind of thoughtful design expertise and the different perspectives designers can bring. Look, I know it, we all know it, and I'll definitely remember it for the next project. Cross-discipline collaboration is the key to success. And on cross-discipline collaboration, IA and tech choices are actually becoming increasingly interrelated. In my experience, this is one of the things content strategists most often neglect, but it's vital, especially as technology evolves. You really need to understand the tech platform before you can make IA recommendations, ideally through working with the developers to identify which of your recommendations are feasible. Your IA choices impact design and tech decisions and vice versa. And this was particularly true for this project in quite an unusual way. So we found that people would organize some key content on the MPI website by either product, so that might be dairy, meat, wine, alcohol, even wood, or task, like store, sell, import, export. So that meant we needed to be able to find a way for people to be able to search by product or task, and ideally surface modular or structured content that related to the user's context. Obviously, we've got no way of telling what a user's mental model is when they come to the site and we can't see them. This is a little bit conceptual, so I'll give you an example. So say someone decides to search MPI. They might be searching for a product like dairy, or they might be searching for a task like exporting. We don't know what an individual's mental model is, so we need to support both ways of searching. This means, depending on what someone searches for, we could serve up content about everything someone could do that was related to dairy. So for example, storing, processing, selling, importing, exporting. Everything someone could export, and there are many things. Or we could serve up specific content about exporting dairy. Modular content related to exporting dairy can be served up dynamically on each page from a central database, meaning that the same content can be reused across multiple pages. This is a way of organizing content that is really gaining in popularity, but it definitely requires technical consideration, and it also requires quite a mature content team with the time to manage a more complex CMS and content structure in-house. That actually wasn't feasible for MPI's initial release for a variety of reasons, but it's something they're considering for a later version. Sometimes tech choices and budget mean we have to make pragmatic IA decisions, and as IA strategists, we need to understand those tech choices in order to make sensible decisions. As we saw earlier with the previous MPI IA, stakeholders really see the IA as a reflection of their organization. They care a lot, and if they don't care at the start of a project, they really will by the time they realize the scale of the change. Stakeholders can be your biggest and best advocates, so build that trust early. We worked hard on the stakeholder engagement in this project, building trust early in the initial stakeholder interviews and focus groups, then through fortnightly updates with around 50 key stakeholders. It's an open forum for them to see progress and ask questions. It's such a stereotype to say bring people along on the journey, but it's a stereotype for a reason, and that's because it works. Whilst I was doing some prep for this talk, I caught up with Will Husnants, who was the digital channels manager at MPI. He described the change in stakeholder perceptions and the ideas of the website as pivotal, moving away from the business units IA shown here into their new customer-focused IA shown here. Involving stakeholders throughout the project, giving them those really in-depth insights, demonstrating examples from other organizations really helped to change their perspectives, and it really paved the way for that more user-centered approach to digital. On that note, the work we did with MPI, so developing that trust with stakeholders and then paving the way for a user-centered approach to digital, this is what enabled behavior change across the organization. And it was a real example of how IA can drive business change. So your IA work can actually change the story a business tells about itself. Your IA work can change business processes and perceptions of digital, which can really make positive change for customers. In the new site shown here, although the business units are still referred to, so biosecurity in this example, Everything else on this page is fully focused on what customers need. And the way that MPI tell their story has changed, both from a content perspective, but also from a visual perspective. Sometimes that kind of business change, changing stakeholders' mindsets, has to happen before customer change can happen. And in this case, MPI stakeholders were incredibly open-minded. They were really helpful and motivated to focus on what was best for their customers. And for that, I'm very grateful. Finally, and something that's always good to remind ourselves of at the start of an IA project, IA is so much more than a menu, and your IA strategy should absolutely reflect that. It's the design choices, it's the content strategy, it's the design of content within a page, it's how your technical systems can display content, it's the business change. So your IA strategy should reflect all of these things. In this case for MPI, in order for the IA, simply the menu or the labels, to succeed, our strategy needed to consider content strategy. So how is content produced, maintained, deleted, governed, and does this support a sustainable IA? How is content designed, and does this support an effective customer-focused IA? Does the UI design and the visual design also support this? Are our IA recommendations actually technically feasible on the CMS? And what would we need to do from a technical and functional requirements perspective to support the IA to succeed? And how will the business processes enable maintenance of a sustainable IA in the long term? How might we support the business with this through a change management and a comms plan? We had to acknowledge that the IA was so much more than a menu. Without these considerations, it would have been difficult to implement an IA, and the IA would have been difficult to sustain in the long term. And this wouldn't have helped MPI's customers get the information they need. So if there's really one thing I'd love for you to take away from this, it's that IA is so much more than a menu. For your IA strategy to succeed, and this is especially true for a complex organization with diverse customer needs, we need to understand the business first, to understand where they are now, and to drive them towards that more customer-focused future. We need to create a customer matrix to enable us to cover the greatest user needs in the most efficient way to really understand our customers. We should card sort, and then definitely card sort again, to understand people's mental models. Always involve designers for the greatest chance of success. We need to understand the tech in order to make feasible recommendations. We need to build trust with stakeholders early because they're our biggest and best advocates. And once you've built that trust, you can really use that IA change to drive business change and change the story a business tells about itself. And that's a privilege to be able to do that. So like I say, IA is so much more than a menu, and I'm looking forward to talking about this more tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. I'm always happy to chat, so please hit me up at UXNZ tomorrow or on LinkedIn. Ka kite everyone, and thank you.